Bet horse racing on DRF Bets. We'll match your first deposit of $200. Get free expert picks and past performances, plus weekly cash back. All from Daily Racing Form, the most trusted name in horse racing.
Hey everyone, I'm David Aragona, and this is the October 19th edition of Horses to Watch, where we carefully analyze trips from the last week, looking for horses that encountered adversity, had troubled trips, and could be worth betting back when they run back in the future. Usually I concentrate on the New York circuit when I do this show, but this week, since the Keeneland meet has begun and there's so much top-level racing happening there, I did want to highlight a couple of races from Keeneland before looking at one race from my usual track, Aqueduct or Belmont at the Big A, that I'll get to towards the end of this show. But let's begin with two turf races from Keeneland last Friday, October 14th. We'll begin with the fifth race from that day. It's an allowance N1X for fillies and mares going a mile on the turf. Let's break these runners from the gate, and I want to focus on the number 8 horse, Isn't She Lovely? This is a Mike Maker trainee who was making the second start for the Mike Maker barn after beginning her career out in Southern California with Richard Mandela, and she had been more of a turf sprinter out there. This was her first ever race around 2 turns, and you can kind of see her inexperience with this longer distance and the 2-turn trip because she was ridden a little bit aggressively to get forward by Gerardo Corrales, but you can see as they get into this clubhouse turn, she starts to run off with him, and he's not asking her for any run, quite the opposite. He's trying to restrain this filly. You can see him in just leaning back in the stirrups there, trying to get her to calm down, and she is just running off with him, opening up this 4-length lead. The rider certainly did not want her to have this big of an advantage early in the race, and you can see these fractions going up 22.95 seconds. That's a pretty quick opening quarter, especially going the 1 mile distance at Keeneland. Just to quote some of the Time Form US pace figures for this race to give a little bit of context about how fast this race actually was, she earned 153 Time Form US pace figures for the first 2 calls of this race at the quarter mile and the half mile. So she is really moving up front, and take note of the 2 fillies that are chasing her, the number 4, number 13. It looks coming to the top of the stretch like she is getting tired. They're about to go right by her because they have better momentum coming to the quarter pole, but somehow Isn't She Lovely is actually going to kick on. She actually has more left in the tank than those 2, and it's going to open up on them again once they get into the stretch. And actually, it's horses that are closing from farther back in the pack that ultimately get closest to her at the wire. She will get closed down by the eventual winner, who's ranging up outside of her right now. The third place finisher, I believe, closes from last place to get up for third here. So Isn't She Lovely ran really well to hold on for second in this race after doing all of that hard work, setting that extremely fast pace on the front end. Like I said, this was her first ever start going the 2 turns, and I think she showed the stamina to handle it. She just has to kind of calm down in the early stages of the race because you can't exert so much energy in the opening quarter and half mile and still have enough to finish off the race and win at the end, but she certainly has the ability to break through this level next time with a more relaxed trip. Let's also take a look at a race from later in that Friday, October 14th card at Keeneland. It's actually the stakes race, the feature race from that day, race 9, the grade 3 Sycamore, going 1.5 miles on the turf course. Let's break these runners from the gate. There's a lot to talk about in this one. Luckily, it's a pretty long race, so I have plenty of time to say it. The 12 furlong distance for these runners, they go around 3 turns. There are a number of horses that I could focus on in this race because, frankly, there are interesting trips to talk about for about half the field. I did highlight 2 of them coming out of the starting gate, the number 10 Balthus and the number 12 Cellist, who had different types of trouble in this race. I do want to point out at this point, though, the number 4 horse Highland Chief, you can see in 4th place right now with that gold saddle towel. He is riding the rail. He's the eventual winner of this race, and I just want to compare his trip to the 2 horses that I'm talking about, as well as some others, because Highland Chief just had everything go his way. You can see he's in the pocket right now, saving ground, and he is basically going to never have to leave the rail, saving ground for the entire race around all of these 3 turns and route to his victory, whereas some others did not have that fortune of saving ground or having a clear run at things. The number 12 Cellist, you can see him in mid-pack right now with that lime green saddle towel. He was 3 wide around the first turn. You're going to see proceeding into the clubhouse turn for the first time here. He is a again going 3 wide, and he'll proceed about 4 wide into the far turn a bit later in the race. Chellis just covered more ground than anybody else in this field, and you'll note when they finally get into the stretch, he never stops running at any point in this race. He actually only loses this race by about a length and a half in finishing 7th. So he is, if you look at the Trackist figures, is going to cover 105 more feet than the eventual winner, that number 4 Highland Chief, because he was wide on the turns and that horse was on the rail on the turns. And 105 feet is a pretty big difference when the final margin between these two horses is just a length and a half. As for the number 10 Balthus, you can see he is also in mid-pack right now in those Peter Brandt dark green and lime green silks. He is a horse who has upside coming into, and I think coming out of this race, because this was his first ever stakes attempt, and Chad Brown was stepping him up into a pretty ambitious spot against some seasoned older rivals. And as they come around the turn here, you can see he's in the 2 path to the 3 path. He was never really on the rail, but not losing quite as much ground as Cellist. And both of these horses try to angle out at the top of the stretch here. Cellist continues to be wide, but there's Balthus that I highlighted first. He is in behind horses here, searching for room between horses, and his rider Manny Franco, he's able to set him down right here, but as they come into the mid-stretch point, you're going to see he's going to have to basically stop riding. He's in traffic, has nowhere to go, just kind of waiting to find a seam to run. You can see right there, he had to snatch the horse to alter course. He finally finds a path right here, and you can see he's once again accelerating right across the wire. I think he ultimately finished 5th in this race, but a slightly unlucky 5th. A horse who had a similar set of traffic troubles to the stretch was the number 1 Arklow, who you might have noticed. I just think Arklow as a horse has a little bit less upside coming out of this race because I think he's 8 years old now. Arklow's a horse that tends to make his own troubled trips. He's a horse that has a lot of trouble in his races because he lacks that turn of foot. Balthus, on the other hand, is an improving 4-year-old. I think we haven't yet seen the best of him, and he's one that I think could move forward out of this race, having had some traffic trouble in the stretch here. Cellist, a horse for Rusty Arnold, like I said, covered all that ground, only lost by a length and a half. He's another one that I think still has some upside. I think he's maybe only 4 years old as well. He's done a little bit more racing than Balthus, but these are both horses that I think if they stay in training next year could make some noise in this marathon division because they showed some real ability here despite finishing off the board in this Sycamore last Friday at Keeneland. Let's head back to my usual circuit, Naira, and talk about one race from Aqueduct last week. It is a race from Sunday, October 16th, the 5th race on the card. It's a New York bred maiden special weight for the 2-year-olds going a mile and a 16th on the turf course. Let's break these runners from the gate, and I want to focus on a first-time starter, the number 1 Zapruder. And you can see as they come out of this chute here, he is the horse in the red cap with the white silks towards the back of the pack on the rail, and he's going to be off the screen for a little bit of this race. So I'm basically going to be talking about describing his trip, even if we can't see him for the entire race. He does just lack some early speed here. You can see his rider, Junior Alvarado, is not restraining him by any means. He's just kind of letting the horse settle where he's comfortable, and that happens to be towards the back of the pack. This race was mostly dominated on the front end by horses who were forwardly placed. You can see the number 10, number 4, and number 6 are 1st, 2nd, and 3rd right now, and they're actually going to be the horses that complete the trifecta, just kind of flip-flopping orders. 6, 4, 10 was the ultimate order of finish of this race. So I do want to highlight a horse that maybe was a little bit compromised by being against the race flow here, and that's the number 1 Zapruder. But I do want to focus mostly on what happens to him in the second half of this race, because you can see he's saving ground and isn't that far back at this point, maybe 7 or 8 lengths off the lead, but now Junior Alvarado is starting to pump on him a little bit, asking him for some run, and the horse is just going absolutely nowhere. He's actually getting passed from the inside right here by the number 7, who's coming along the inside, traveling much more in the bridle than he is, and there's Zapruder. You can see Junior's kind of giving him some token nudges on the neck, asking him to go, and the horse is just kind of going up and down, not really doing any running at all. But watch what happens to him as they get into the straightaway. He angles to the outside. Junior really sets him down for the first time. You can just see right here before he goes off the screen, the horse starts to lengthen his stride a little bit. And now take note of where the number 3 and number 5 are. The 3 is the horse in the pink silks. The 5 are the red cap. They're just fading off the screen right now because the number 1 Zapruder, despite being about 8 lengths behind those horses at the top of the stretch, is going to split them on the wide. And you'll see him cross the finish right here, really moving fastest of all, almost catching that number 3 horse as they come under the wire there. And I'll just quote some Trackist stats for this horse. Even though he was far back in the early going, he was finishing fastest of any horse in this race at the end. stand, track has caught him covering his final quarter mile in 23.21 seconds, which is really moving at the end of the race, and the final 16th of a mile in 5.75 seconds, which is actually a 23-second quarter pace. So he was moving fastest of all at the very end of his race, suggesting that he finished up this race with something left in the tank, and I don't think we saw the best that he has to offer in this debut effort. Just a horse that looked really unfocused. The other curious thing about him is he's got more of a dirt pedigree. He's by Lauban. He's a half-brother to dirt stakes winner Blind Willie McTell, as well as a bunch of other dirt winners. So I wonder if he debuted on the turf just because he has that sluggish nature to him, so maybe he didn't show a lot to Bill Mott in the morning, but I think this horse has more ability than he showed in this first start and might be able to do better in his next start down the line, either on turf or dirt in the future. I think he's one that could be worth following. So those are all the horses to watch for this week. If you want to follow these runners moving forward, you can add them to your horse watch on DRF.com. Just add them to a list and you'll get email notifications when these horses run back in the future. Thanks for tuning in this week, and make sure to catch future episodes of Horses to Watch on upcoming Wednesdays.